Thank you so much to the Consul General, Mauricio. Thank you very much, Consul. And to Tom Lee Institution for inviting me to give this presentation this afternoon. Thank you, Holly, and thank you, Lea. You know, it's a great opportunity. I think that one of the, as you're going to see, I think, our region has over 360 years of history. And sometimes, you know, people say that we do not have an identity. And that is not true. You know, as a region, we have a long and beautiful history. And one of the things is that we do very little in writing about our history. There's a lot of studies, and we have historians and everything. But have you ever read a book that tells you the continuity of our histories in 1659 when the mission was founded? Or have you read a book that tells you the continuity of our history from the Chamizal till now? See, they're not. I have not found one yet, and that's one of the things that I'm trying to do in publishing these books. You know, what happened between 1659 when Fray Garcia de San Francisco, founded or started the mission, and then usually in Juárez, the next thing we know is 1865, when Benito Juárez came down. What happened during those 200 years? Well, we have a lot of history, a lot of things happened. And a lot of the things that we go through today, you cannot understand them, and you cannot plan about them or solve the problems that we have if you don't have a clear knowledge of what has been going on for 360 years in the region. So this is something that's why when they tell me, why do you have this, you know, so many sides to your character, you know? Well, the thing is that everything mixes up. Everything is part of a unit. And you cannot understand history if you do not understand business. But you also cannot understand history if you do not know about music. See, so everything it's a whole. Life is only one thing. And in order to understand history, I think you have to do a big effort in trying to understand a little about everything. So this presentation is 2 contributions to border life by Benito Juárez. The first thing is that I want to tell you what happened, what was going on, what was the experience of our community in the 19th century. And when I'm approaching it from a local perspective, you know, the inhabitants of the region. Well, we had a war, and then a treaty, a peace treaty, and the border was established. But see, that, you know, before the flow of people and merchandise was interrupted, and the border was born as a complex reality. You know, we see once on the other night that we were in a position in the mountain where we were able to see both cities together. You cannot see the border, you know. But, you know, local people are affected greatly, you know, for good and for bad, you know. But at the same time, we are a single unit. But back in the 19th century, please, the next one, we had some negative impacts that I don't think that the federal governments, when they established the border, knew that what were going to happen. First, we had split families and states. You know, the Azcárate Ranch, part of it was left in the U.S. side, and part of it was left in the Juárez side. You know, and it was a huge ranch. So the states were divided, but also the families. We had double regulations, you know. Suddenly people that knew only one regulation, the King of Spain, you know, now had to learn the regulations of the United States and the regulations of Mexico. Now we have a lot of regulations. We have the regulations of New Mexico, the regulations of Chihuahua, the regulations of Texas, the regulations of Mexico, and the regulations of the United States. And that's border life, you know, it got more complex. There are different tariffs and legal schemes, you know, to do commerce. They're different, completely different. Imports and exports are different, the way they're handled in one side and in the other. Then a new market reality appeared. You know, the Mexican market, the US market, the El Paso market, the Juárez market. Those were new things back in 1848. You know, the boundary conflicts, you know, the Chamizal story, you know, that started happening too. And then we have this inertia of forgetfulness of the federal governments and the state governments. They're so far away, you know, that they don't know that all of this is going on because it's not happening in Washington, D.C., it's not happening in Mexico City, it's happening at the border, okay? So that was the new reality of the 19th century. The next. This is a newspaper of 1856, of April 22, 1856, the Echo of the Border, Echo de la Frontera, about the tremendous immigration from Paso del Norte, now Juárez, to the U.S. caused by the cost of living, the high costs for livestock and agriculture, the lack of inputs, high taxes, and the corruption of custom agents. We had custom offices, new custom offices established to collect taxes. This is in 1856. So the border, and if you hear that, it's like if you were reading the newspaper today, right? It's exactly the same thing. See, do you see when I say that it's forgetfulness of the federal government? You know, since 1848, it's the same thing. It's a different reality in the border. So, when I found this article, you know, I was very interested because it seemed like I was reading it from yesterday, you know. So the next, okay. So there's always local people. Local people. Local people are the ones that have to eat the problems, let me say it that way, every day. You know, it's not like if you want to solve the problems. You have to solve the problems. Why? Because you live here. You're dealing with it. You know, you have to really take care of it because it's the safety of your family, is the safety of one's own safety. So you have to get into the problem, you know. So there's always people in the border that somehow have this common good conscience. And they start working in solving the problems for everybody. Not only the personal problems, but for everybody, looking for the common good. And this is one example. This is Mariano Samaniego. If you go to the university, the hospital, what it used to be, the Chamizal, and you see a big, beautiful mural in the lobby of the
University.
the University Medical Center. There's a big, beautiful new mural there, painted. And the very first person that you see there is this picture right here, Mariano Samaniego. And he was a doctor. You know, he actually was born in Bavispe, Sonora, but he was the nephew of the priest that was the priest of the Mission of Guadalupe for 60 years, Ramon Ortiz. And actually he was born, but Ramon Ortiz was born in Santa Fe, but he lived in Juárez in charge of the mission for 60 years, and the only church at the time in the region, both sides of the border, was the Mission of Guadalupe. So Father Ortiz was the priest for everybody, no matter the border, you know. And Mariano Samaniego actually is credited to starting the public medical system in El Paso, even though he was from Juárez. You know, to me it was very interesting to see his picture there of Mariano Samaniego. And in Juárez, there's other people here like McGoffins, you know, all these people in the 19th century. But in Juárez, we had Inocente Ochoa, Rafael Velarde, and the priest Ortiz that confronted the new border reality, and they dedicated their lives to creating the new conditions that would allow the area to survive. You know, so we owe them. Actually, most of these people, their tombs or their you know, resting is in the temple of San Jose, the mission of San Jose, which is not a mission, but it's known as a mission in Juárez. We have their tombs there, you know, so these people are the most important people of the 19th century, and a lot of our current history is not understood if it wasn't for them. Okay, the next one, please. Well, when Benito Juárez came, you know, defending the nation of Mexico from the Second Empire. The first empire being Iturbide. The Second Empire was the invasion of France, and bringing Maximilian of Austria, to rule over Mexico. He was defending the Republic, and he stayed in Juárez from 1865 and 1866 to 1866. And he became, he was having a lot of financial problems. So Rafael Velarde, this is the only data that I know, but he loaned the Republic of Mexico almost 5,000 pesos, which was a lot of money of the time, to sustain Juárez's stay. Okay? And later, there was such a close relationship, because what Juárez did is that he was able to detect the crisis that was caused after the establishment of the border. So Benito Juárez is going to have some changes in policy when he returns to power to Mexico City in order to help the border. And so this is another letter from Joaquín Álvarez to Benito Juárez. I got this from Tamayo in one of his books, and it says, "Please, we ask you to allow us, the inhabitants of Paso del Norte, the honor of proposing you as President of Mexico, and if this is not possible, you represent us in the Congress of the Union. We need representation that knows firsthand the needs of our region." Letter from Joaquín Álvarez. Okay, so President Juárez knew the crisis that we were going through. And, as good politicians, looking for the common good, these people were, supporting Benito Juárez, because they knew that they understood and the border was going to be in a better condition if he continued in power. Okay, the next one. So, for example, what happened? After returning to power, Benito Juárez gave, this is the third bullet, 16% of the total revenues collected by the federal government in the state of Chihuahua to Paso del Norte to reconstruct the village. And that's when this little village started transforming to a little city. So, for example, they ordered the reconstruction of the acequia madre, which was the system for human consumption. We see the acequias or the canals right now, and we cannot imagine that was actually where we drank the water from the acequia. And then Samaniego was commissioned to go and visit Benito Juárez and remind him, remember that we loan you money, what are you going to do in return? So he gave these funds back, and the Supreme Government of Mexico, the Republican Government of Mexico, recognized the contribution of the inhabitants of Paso del Norte towards the maintenance of the Republic. But see, the first thing that Benito Juárez did for a region is that it gave the funds so that the infrastructure to change a small village into a small city happened after the support, and he fulfilled his promise. He sent the funds. When you change the name of a street anywhere, but in Juárez, this is the street, Juárez Porvenir. Now it's going to be Gómez Morín. There's a big fight always, because the old people, they like the old name and, this new name. Imagine if for example, Montana now is going to be named, I don't know, Jefferson or something. There's always a conflict. My big question was if there was a conflict when they changed the name, beautiful name, from Paso del Norte to Ciudad Juárez. I've never found a sign of conflict. The only thing that you read in the old newspapers is that there was a big feast till very late at night, dances in the middle of 16th of September, big festivities. Why? Because they were thankful of all that support that President Benito Juárez gave to Ciudad Juárez. And there was no conflict. That's why peacefully we changed the name from Paso del Norte to Ciudad Juárez in recognition of the support of and the fulfillment of his promise of President Juárez. The next one. When President Juárez arrived, he was not only facing the war with the French and the Austrians and the Europeans, with Napoleon III, which was, I think, the most powerful man in the world back then in the 19th century. And the United States was almost in the last year, 1965, of the Civil War. So right now, just to try to get an idea of the hits of the 1860s, the music, I've asked Ezequiel Mesa, has a doctor's degree from Oklahoma in piano, to play the hymn of the Republic, so we could hear one of the hits of the 1860s. Actually, the hymn of the Republic comes from a poem that was published in 1861. And then they took the Methodist hymn book, and they took the param 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 param. That's a Methodist hymn. Glory, glory, hallelujah. It comes from the Methodist hymnal. And we do not know exactly where it became, from a poem, became a battle song representing the Union. So, that's the hit parade of the 1860s. Let's go to the next. Okay. In the middle of this Civil War, this is something that we always forget in the border. We not only have to deal with Mexico, the United States, Texas, New Mexico, Chihuahua, the Juárez government, the local government, Las Cruces. We also are in the middle of geopolitics. Right now, for example, between Juárez and El Paso, we provide, a very important amount of the supplies of for industry in the world. A lot of the products that we use in the world, cars and refrigerators and computers, are being built and manufactured in our region. There's a possibility that we can stop global manufacturing if we have a local problem, like the closing of the bridges. We stop the world. And this is something that is very serious. And I don't think that right now we have enough awareness of what that means, the responsibility to the world. And the geopolitics was very important. Back then in 1865, Lincoln, who was the Union, was offering the support to Benito Juárez. Because Lincoln did not want Benito Juárez to support the Confederacy. Now, Benito Juárez supported Lincoln because he did not want Lincoln to support Maximilian. So Maximilian, which represented the interest of Napoleon III, he was begging the United States to recognize the empire, his empire, Maximilian as the king of Mexico. And actually, he became neutral. And I think that was a mistake that he committed. Because the Confederacy, had the hope, the big hope, that Europe, Italy, Germany, France, England, but mostly France, was going to support the Confederacy And Napoleon was going to order Maximilian to support the Confederacy. That was the bit of the Confederacy. Why did the Confederacy thought this? Because they were the main suppliers of cotton. So that's why the term King Cotton, because cotton was the most important product that the Confederacy or the South was selling to Europe. In Europe, all of the textile industry depended on the cotton from the Confederacy. So they had a lot of hopes, that King Cotton was going to convince Napoleon and Maximilian to support, the Confederacy and not Lincoln. But this never happened. Actually, Texas was the state farther west, that became part of the Confederacy. Was one of the last states to unite. The first 7 were part of the South, and Texas was, but here in a region, the support to the Confederacy did not last. Actually, the Confederacy Army lost the Glorieta battle, and they have to flee away. And Fort Bliss was taken first by Confederacy, but they had to flee. They had to go away. And the Fort Bliss was left alone for a year. And actually, the Apache took over, and they were taking advantage, and there was a lot of insecurity in the region. So this is what was going on when Benito Juárez was coming towards the battle hymn of the Republic, towards that environment. And so what is going to happen here in our region, the contact that is going to be part of Benito Juárez with the government of Lincoln is going to be fundamental in the ending of both wars, both the Civil War and the conflict with the French in Mexico. So we're in the middle of that, of that problem. Next one. This guy, General James Henry Carleton, he actually was a volunteer soldier. He was not an official soldier of the U.S. Army, of the Union Army. He was actually from California, and he put together an army, and he came to help first the governor of New Mexico against the Confederacy. And then the governor of New Mexico asked him to come down and take over Fort Bliss. And he was here in Fort Bliss after took it from the Apaches, and he was the one that brought peace in the presence of the Union. Even though Texas was part of the Confederacy, the Fort Bliss was being run by the Union and by Lincoln. And there was a lot of contact, and this is something that is very interesting, because in the history of Mexico, you never see this. But look at a Washington dispatch of the 7th reports the United States officers of Fort Bliss were to give a grand ball to President Juárez on the 11th of November, and the invitations were already out as follows. The United States officers at Fort Bliss beg the honor of your company to a ball to be given to Benito Juárez, constitutional president of Mexican Republic, as a token of senior and respect tomorrow evening at Mr. Lixto's Rogogen, El Paso, November 10, 1865. So there was actually a party for President Juárez in the Fort Bliss. Okay, and sometimes when we come to this type of events, we don't think that we might be part of history in the future, And this is a normal event. This is not registered anywhere. I've never seen it in Mexico, that actually President Juárez came to a ball in Fort Bliss. Actually, the reason I think is that Maximilian, I think he knew, because there's a declaration of Maximilian that he no longer recognized Juárez because he had left the Mexican territory. And actually, there's an answer from President Juárez saying, I never left the territory, but the newspapers say otherwise, So, there was no internet back then, or, Instagram or Facebook, so there's no proof. But it is interesting that during those contacts through this guy, and the first contacts that Margarita Massa had during the New Orleans stay, that she went to Washington, D.C., those were the two main events of communication between Lincoln and President Juárez. And it's great to know that it's in a ball, that it's not a formal, setting, but it's actually, they were talking about what they were going to do while they were eating and dancing and drinking, Okay, so next. Okay, so now let's hear what Maximilian and the rich were hearing. In the hit parade of the 1860s, this is another number by Ezequiel Mesa. The great composer of the time of the 1860s was Wagner and Strauss. And this is Strauss, Johann Strauss, with Blue Danube. Important after we had the war, having two presidents, Lincoln and Juárez, to start negotiations again in peace. Because that's the start of a lot of other negotiations. It's the first try, the first effort in diplomacy. We're in the consulate. That's one of the big roles, to be cooking, let me put it that way, or developing, these negotiations little by little. Through dance, through music, through parties, through business meetings, diplomacy. And let me give you just some of the most important negotiations that has affected since then our life. The creation of the International Water Boundaries Commissions in both sides. In 1889, that have controlled all conflicts regarding surface water, the Colorado River and the Rio Grande, and our borders. We live in peace with a very formal process that is over 100 years, and that it works. And it has maintained the peace between our two nations in 1889. The Treaty of the Water Treaty of 1944, that fortified the IBWCs, and it's working. Some people don't understand, how difficult, because when you take state interests, it's very different than when you see it from national interest. but actually the treaty works very well from the national perspective. There's some things that we might be able to work in the local levels for some communities, but it works pretty well. The treaty, the water treaty of 1944. The Chamizal dispute, over 100 years, finally resolved in 1964 with President Kennedy visiting President Adolfo López Mateos in 1963. And at the time, the IBWCs had 15 different solutions for the problem. And the presidents picked one, which is the one that we drive by every single day. The Maquiladora program, both sides benefit. And that program is actually not in an agreement. I've never seen the agreement signed by two countries creating the Maquiladora program. It's more an adaptation of the customs and the fiscal laws of both nations and some environmental laws to be able to create the industry in the border. The La Paz, Baja California Cooperation Program, La Paz Agreement, that is known as El Acuerdo de La Paz between President Reagan and President de la Madrid, that developed most of our water plants in the border, water treatment plants, sewage plants. NAFTA, the first free trade agreement, the creation of the NAT Bank in BEC, which no longer exists, the Border Environmental Cooperation Commission. I had the privilege of being the director for representing Mexico BEC for 5 years. So I'm in the middle of this history too, that's another thing that I've done in my life. And then the US-Mexico-Canada free trade agreement that is going to be reviewed again in 3 years. Okay, so the negotiations continue. The need to keep on talking and keep on going to parties and drinking and diplomacy, it's alive, and it needs to be alive always, because this is a reality of our binational life. The next one. Okay, but there's a lot of things that happen. For example, in a region, because of this dialogue, a lot of technology and a lot of knowledge goes through here. And, either from Mexico impacts the United States. Who could imagine that the most sold, food during the finals of the football game is chips and guacamole? So that's the influence of Mexico all over the United States. But who could imagine that movies and TV was going to come through Juárez, El Paso, because the first movie ever filmed in Juárez, in Mexico actually, was filmed in Juárez, and it's a bullfight actually. And that was because there was in 1895, the Texas Governor Culberson prohibited boxing. So there was a heavyweight championship that was going to happen in El Paso, and since there was a boxing prohibition, it was fought in Juárez. And in order for Thomas Edison, who had sent a company to film movies to produce material for his projector, the one that you see and put a quarter, not the projected one, but the one that you used to have in bars and restaurants, Caleidoscopio in Spanish. They actually filmed for the first time a bullfight in El Paso. The next one. Well, the grandfather of Mariano Samaniego, actually Mariano Samaniego is the grandfather of the most important actor in Hollywood after Rodolfo Valentino in the silent movies. The next actor that made over $100,000 per movie in the 1920s was Ramon Novarro, and he was the grandson of Mariano Samaniego. And then so you see the movies, and then the other one. Well, we have another actor that was known in Hollywood. The name was Gilbert Roland. He was actually known for a program called the Cisco Kid. And the Cisco Kid, which was a TV program in the 1950s and 60s, this was one of the Cisco Kids. And you know where he was born? In Juárez, in the bull ring. Because his father, Francisco Alonso Paquiro, was a bullfighter, and he rented the bull ring to give a spectacle, make money, and organize bullfights. And he lived in the plaza, and that's where Gilbert Roland lived. You know, as Chihuahua City, you know, they have Anthony Quinn, you know. We should also honor Juárez, Gilbert Roland. We never did it live. He died in the 1990s. And unfortunately, I did not discover that we had an actor from Hollywood born in Juárez, because we know very little about our local history. But see the contributions of negotiations? It comes down to the people and to everyday life. The next one. Business. The first business, we still talk about the free trade agreements, but you know the first negotiations of business between companies, where did it happen? Some of the first ones here in El Paso, Juárez, Paso del Norte. We had the first streetcars. We had the McGuffins and the Ochoas, you know, owning the part of the business in each side of the border, but it was a binational effort. The same thing happened with electricity. We were one of the cities that had public lighting, first because of natural gas, and that's because of electricity, because we had the company from El Paso, you know, making business with businessmen in Juárez to provide the service in Juárez. And, you know, do you see that picture of Madero during the take of Juárez in the revolution? Look at the sign in La Casa de Adobe. Bell phone. Bell phone installed, one of the first phones in Mexico. You know? And through the walking bridge that was in Azarco, that people used to walk to go to the Mexican side, they crossed the cable to install a phone from Bell phone in the revolutionaries' leader's home. You know? Talk about business affecting, you know, the war, you know, with instant communication, you know, with President Madero in the Adobe house. Next. Well, we have the three Edison tenors. Some people say that Thomas Edison was from Mexico. There's a big discussion about that. And actually, I think he's from the United States. But he's the one that first recorded, because he invented the gramophone, or one of the big long plays. And he recorded José Mojica, Alexander Bonchi, and Giuseppe Anselmi, the first three tenors that recorded. So these are the original three tenors. We now know Plácido, Carreras, and Pavarotti, you know, as the three tenors. But the first three tenors were recorded by Thomas Edison. Actually, José Mojica came to El Paso when he was already a priest, and he first gave a concert as a tenor in the Franciscan Seminary by Loreto. And if you go to the seminary, and if you go to the inside office, you know, where they prepare before Mass, you will see a picture of José Mojica. And in his book of Yo Pecador that he wrote, José Mojica tells that it was a big thing for him, that he had come as a tenor to sing in front of this, you know, party. And then later, the same room became the church, or the services where they have the Catholic service. And then he was not now functioning as a priest. You know, so he sang in the same room as a tenor, and you know, and he complied as a priest. You know, he also performed as a priest in the same room. You know, a big party and a bigger party with Mass. You know. Okay, José Mojica. The next one. This lady that used to sign M. Griever, she married an American, went to live first in New York and in Los Angeles. She signed M. Griever because they thought that she was a man. Because this is 1920s, because she wrote so beautiful music that they didn't believe that it was a woman writing. And she wrote two songs that I'm going to sing for you right now. That was a big hit both in the United States and in Mexico. The first one is Alma Mía by María Griver.
Alma mía, sola, siempre sola, sin que nadie comprenda mi sufrimiento, mi horrible padecer, fingiendo una existencia siempre llena de dicha y de placer. Si yo encontrara un alma como la mía, cuántas cosas secretas le contaría. Un alma que al mirarla sin decir nada me lo dijera todo con la mirada. Un alma embriagase con suave aliento, que al besarla sintiera lo que yo siento. A veces me pregunto qué pasaría si yo encontrara un alma como la mía.
And then they recorded, this is the hit parade of the 1930s, 1920s, 1930s. Jose Mojica recorded these two songs, and the biggest hit of María Griver is a song named Júrame, Promise Me. Júrame, Promise Me.
Dicen que es mentira que te quiero, porque nunca me habían visto enamorado. Yo te juro que yo mismo no comprendo el por qué tu mirar me ha fascinado. Cuando estoy cerca de ti y estás contenta, no quisiera que de nadie te acordaras. Tengo celos hasta del pensamiento que puedo recordarte a otra persona amada. Júrame que aunque pase mucho tiempo, no olvidarás el momento en que yo te conocí. Ni más grande en este mundo que el cariño que te di. Bésame con un beso enamorado, como nadie me ha besado desde el día en que nací.
So Tom Lee, 1930s, 1940s now. Tom Lee, for the first time, like Holly told us at the beginning, painted Benito Juárez of a person that he never met in real life. He only did it with two people. One of them was Benito Juárez. And at the time, this was World War II. And there was a danger of Latin America uniting with the Third Reich. So there was a big effort to strengthen the commercial relations between Mexico, Latin America, and the United States, to become allies once again. And there was organizations, local organizations, like the Pan American Round Table, that promoted together people from Juárez and El Paso that belonged to the Pan American Round Table, promoted commerce in the region. If you know Juárez, you know that there's Brazil, Venezuela, Uruguay, Panama, Costa Rica, all of the names of those streets. Well, that's part of this, because those are the first members of the Organización de Estados Americanos. Those are the original. And the Pan American Round Table and people promoting commerce between, in the OEA, how do you say it in English? American states. And that's why it ends in America's Avenue. So we were promoting commerce since the 1940s. And in the middle of that, Tom Lee knew that there was a president that started the first efforts of negotiation between the two countries after a war. Serious negotiations of allying, and this was Presidente Juárez. I don't know if this was one of the reasons why he painted, his work of art. But knowing Tom Lee, the knowledge that he had of local history, he knew something, because this is part of that big effort of promotion, of unity and promotion of commerce between Mexico and the United States and the Americas. Again. And at that time, we were talking about getting closer and kissing. And there's another composer called Consuelito Velázquez that had one of the most famous Mexican songs in the United States that is called Bésame Mucho.
Bésame, bésame mucho, como si fuera esta noche la última vez. Bésame, bésame mucho, que tengo miedo perderte otra vez. Quiero tenerte muy cerca, mirarme en tus ojos, verte junto a mí. Piensa que tal vez mañana yo ya estaré lejos, muy lejos de ti. Bésame. Bésame mucho, como si fuera esta noche la última vez. Bésame, bésame mucho, que tengo miedo perderte otra vez.
I have 5 minutes. Okay. The next one, please. Well, when they ask me what is the most important monument of the region. This is in Juárez, of Benito Juárez. This is something that we forgot already. In 1888, when there was a change of name by the Congress of the state of Chihuahua and President Diaz, from Paso del Norte to Ciudad Juárez, President Diaz sent as a gift to the city of Juárez, the new city of Juárez, a busto of Benito Juárez. And you see that picture over there. Do you see the Benito Juárez, a small Benito Juárez on top of the monument there in the Mission of Guadalupe? Well, that it still exists. And to me, the most important Benito Juárez that we have in our region is this one. Because this is the one that was, inaugurated when Juárez became Ciudad Juárez. And that is in the elementary school, Benito Juárez, in Calle Oro. Don Armando B. Chavez, who was the principal of the elementary school, was a historian, wrote one of the great books of history of Juárez. And he asked, when they remodeled the plaza, the downtown plaza, to move the bus to the school. And I'm glad he did, because I think that's why it survived. Because it is bronze, pure bronze, and it's still there. But this, to me, this is the most important. That one thing that I would like to do in the future is to remodel the school. Because the most important is not the monument of Vicente Guerrero of 1909. It's this one of 1888. This is when we became Ciudad Juárez. Again, those are all the monuments that we have in Juárez. That used to be the Kilómetro 20, that no longer looks like that, but that's the Chamizal. And that's the 1909 that was inaugurated by Presidente Diaz. We have a lot of monuments. The next one, please. And then we have the one now at the entrance of Córdoba Bridge in the Mexican side. That's how it looks now in Kilómetro 20, the exit to Chihuahua. That's the one that is next to the cathedral, that they thought that this was the one that appears in the old picture of the mission, and it's not this one. This is a newer one. And that's the one that is inside the municipal presidency, or the Presidencia Municipal in Juárez. So and now in our region, we have one that is, we're very happy to celebrate tonight. That's the Abraham Lincoln in Ciudad Juárez, okay? And the next one, now let me go back to the other picture. We have to change something because they moved it. Now Abraham Lincoln is facing south. It used to be facing north. That's why I put this picture. But I told Mayor of Juárez, I said, somebody didn't know the story and moved it because they thought they didn't know the history. Now that we have the Benito Juárez, we have to have them facing each other, So we're going to start a movement to correct that, okay? But if you see, okay, so now the other one? Oh, no. You went the other way. And this is the Benito Juárez that we now have in the, in the Chamizal in the Mexican side. One last thing that I want to tell you about the history. Go ahead. Another thing that came of negotiations that were very important, that has a big impact in the history of both El Paso and Juárez, is the arrival of the railroad. And that was a work that had to be coordinated because from New York to El Paso, New York, Chicago, El Paso, crossing through St. Louis and Missouri, and Los Angeles to El Paso was connected in 1982, more or less. And in 1988, Mexico City was connected to El Paso, Texas. Before, traveling from Spain to Mexico, you used to jump to New York, take another boat, go around Florida, go through the Louisiana, and you could not lose the sight of land because there was no weather service. Can you imagine crossing the Gulf of Mexico in the middle of hurricane season with no weather service? So you could not lose the sight of land. In case of a hurricane, you could go fast to the land. So the trips from Europe to Mexico were very, very long. When the railroad was connected, it was something like the opening of internet, you know? It was the internet of the 19th century. Everything became fast. And in less than 2 weeks, you could be from New York all the way to Mexico City. Changed life completely. The beginning of logistics, you know, in a region which now we're very strong. And in those trains, a lot of Spaniards came. Bullfights started. Wrestling started. Movies were filmed. Came through a region, and a lot of Spaniards. And a composer called Agustin Lara had never gone to Granada, you know, and he wrote one of the most famous songs honoring the city of Granada without ever stepping foot on it. Actually, he visited Granada until he had composed Granada. So this is the last song I will sing for you, and this is honoring all of those Spaniards that, you know, expressed the beauty of Granada to Agustin Lara so he could imagine Granada and to able to write his song.
Soñada por mí, mi cantar se vuelve gitano cuando es para ti. Mi cantar hecho de fantasía, mi cantar flor de melancolía. Tierra ensangrentada en tardes de toros, mujer que conserva el embrujo de los ojos moros, de sueño rebelde gitana cubierta de flores. Tu boca de grana, jugosa manzana que me habla de amores. Granada, Manola cantada en coplas preciosas. No tengo otra cosa que darte que un ramo de rosas de suave fragancia que le dieran marco a la Virgen morena. Granada, tu tierra está llena de lindas mujeres, de sangre y de sol.
Thank you very much. Thank you.